All right, so today we are diving into some Renaissance philosophy.
Hmm.
Um, Getting into the work of Bernardino Telesio, a thinker who really shook things up back in the 16th century. You've sent over a bunch of your research on him. And let me tell you, this guy, he was way ahead of his time.
Absolutely. While everyone else was busy, obsessing over Aristotle, Telesio was out there saying, hold on, shouldn't we be using our senses and doing experiments to figure things out?
Yeah, I love it already. So for those of you listening, today's deep dive is all about understanding why Telesio was such a radical figure. We'll explore how he challenged the established ideas of his time and really laid some groundwork for modern science and philosophy.
Yeah, a perfect way to put it, to really grasp Telesio's impact. We need to remember that in the 1500s, Aristotle's ideas were basically gospel. Challenging him was like challenging the church itself.
Okay, so the stage is set. We've got a major philosophical rebellion brewing. But who was Telesio? Give us a little background on this intellectual revolutionary.
Well, he was born in 1509 in Italy, came from a wealthy family and got to study at all the fancy universities like Padua. But here's the thing. He never became a professor.
Really? Why not? It sounds like he had the perfect setup for a cushy academic life.
He did. But Telesio was much more interested in blazing his own trail. He formed this really cool group called the Academia Cosentina, dedicated to, get this, natural philosophy, which was super forward-thinking for that era.
Wow, I can see why you're so excited about him. But
Yep.
let's talk about his big ideas. He wrote this massive book, De Rerum Natura Juxta Propria Principia, right?
Yeah.
9 books covering everything from cosmology to ethics. That's ambitious, to say the least.
Well, it's a total doorstop, but incredibly insightful, and it all hinges on this radical departure from Aristotle. Telesio basically said, let's ditch all this abstract metaphysical stuff and focus on what we can actually observe with our senses.
Okay, so I'm hearing a serious paradigm shift here. What did he propose instead of all those traditional metaphysical frameworks that were so popular back then?
He argued that the universe is built on just 3 fundamental principles: matter, heat, and cold. That's it. No fancy forms, no divine plans, just these raw, natural forces interacting with each other.
So it's like a cosmic recipe, but with only 3 ingredients.
Exactly. Think of it as a constant push and pull. Heat expands, cold contracts, and their interplay creates all the diversity and complexity we see in the world.
So goodbye to the traditional view of a divided cosmos
Mhm.
with like an earthly realm separate from the heavens.
Gone. For Telesio, space is absolute. There's no distinction between the sublunary and superlunary spheres that Aristotle was so fond of. Everything operates according to the same natural laws.
Hmm. That's a pretty bold statement for a 16th century thinker.
Yeah.
But what about the question of how the universe got started in the first place? Did he have any thoughts on that?
Oh, he did, and they were pretty radical too. He actually criticized Aristotle's idea of an unmoved mover god as the ultimate cause of celestial motion.
Wait, so how did he explain the movement of the planets and stars if not through a divine being setting things in motion?
He argued that the sky moves because it is its nature to move. It's self-sustaining. No need for a divine push.
Wow. That's a pretty revolutionary concept. So
Yeah.
we've got a universe driven by heat and cold, constantly changing, evolving without any need for divine intervention. But where do we fit into all of this? What about things like souls and minds?
Well, for Telesio, the soul isn't some separate, ethereal thing. He calls it spiritus, a material substance that flows through our nervous system and is primarily concentrated in the brain.
Hold on. Is he saying that our minds are actually part of our physical bodies? That's a pretty wild concept for his time, right?
Absolutely. And it leads to some really interesting implications, because if the soul is material, it means there's no fundamental difference between living and non-living things, or even between humans and animals. It's all just a matter of complexity and the amount of heat a being possesses.
That completely flips the traditional hierarchy of beings on its head. No more special status for humans at the top of the chain.
Exactly. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Telesio's spiritus concept has huge implications for understanding everything from sense perception to knowledge itself.
Okay, you've definitely piqued my curiosity. But before we dive into all of that, we need to take a break. Don't go anywhere, listeners, because when we come back, we're going to unpack how Telesio's radical ideas about the soul and spiritus changed the way he thought about how we experience and understand the world around us. Okay, so before the break, we were getting into some seriously mind-bending territory with Telesio's concept of the spiritus. For those of you just tuning in, it's basically his version of the soul. But instead of being this separate, ethereal thing, it's actually a material substance that's part of our physical bodies.
Yeah, it's one of the most radical and fascinating aspects of his philosophy, and it really sets the stage for how he understands, everything else, from how we experience the world through our senses to how we build knowledge and make sense of reality.
Right. All right. So let's dive into that. How does Telesio's idea of spiritus actually play out in his theories of sense perception and knowledge?
Well, remember, he was all about like ditching abstract metaphysics
Yeah.
and focusing on what we can observe and experience directly.
Right. He was a true empiricist before the term even existed.
Exactly. And that's where spiritus comes in. Think of it as the bridge between the external world and our inner experience. Instead of passively receiving information through our senses, Telesio believed that our spiritus actively reacts to sensory input with specific movements.
Wait, movements, like our spiritus is doing a little dance inside us every time we see or hear or touch something.
You could say that. And those movements are actually what we remember, according to Telesio. It's not the visual image or the sound itself, but the memory of how our spiritus reacted to that specific sensation.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So if I touch a hot stove, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your spiritus would react with a particular movement, a kind of physical encoding of that experience of pain. And later, when you encounter something similar, maybe you see a fire, your spiritus recognizes that familiar movement and says, hey, this is like that hot stove thing, danger. That's how we learn to associate certain sensations with specific objects or concepts.
So our memories aren't like little photographs or sound recordings stored in our brains. They're more like a library of spiritus movements, each one representing a past experience.
Precisely. And this leads to a really fascinating understanding of knowledge itself, because for Telesio, reason isn't some separate faculty operating in a purely mental realm. It's grounded in these bodily sensations and how our spiritus interacts with the world.
So he's saying that even our most abstract thoughts and concepts ultimately stem from our physical experiences.
Exactly. He believed that understanding is at its core a form of remembering and evaluating these spiritus movements. We compare new experiences to this library of past reactions, make connections and draw conclusions based on what our spiritus tells us.
This is pretty mind-blowing stuff. It makes you realize how much we take for granted about how our minds work.
It really does. And what's even more amazing is that Telesio was proposing these ideas like centuries before modern neuroscience started to uncover the complex interplay between our brains, our bodies, and our experiences.
Yeah, he was way ahead of the curve. But I have to ask, how does this whole system work with the abstract concepts, things like math or logic? Surely those can't be reduced to spiritus movements, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But Telesio was adamant that even our most abstract knowledge ultimately traces back to our sensory experiences.
So how on earth did he explain something like math, which seems so detached from the physical world?
He argued that math isn't some divine or perfect realm of pure thought. It's actually a system we've built based on our observations of the physical world. For example, the concept of number, arose from our experience of counting concrete objects like fingers or pebbles.
Okay, I see what he's getting at. Even something as abstract as math ultimately has its roots in our concrete interactions with the world around us.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And for Telesio, that was the key to true understanding, to move away from abstract speculations and ground knowledge in the tangible, the observable, the realm of experience.
It's amazing how his philosophy prefigures so many modern ideas about cognition and the embodied nature of thought. But before we get too carried away with how revolutionary Telesio's theories were, I think it's time to address the elephant in the room.
You mean the church?
Exactly. Here's a guy challenging some of the most fundamental tenets of of Aristotelian philosophy, which is pretty much intertwined with church doctrine at the time. How did he manage to navigate that tricky landscape?
Well, it's actually quite remarkable. Despite how radical his ideas were, Telesio never explicitly denied the existence of God.
So he acknowledged the divine creator, but his focus was very much on understanding the world through observation and reason, not relying on religious dogma.
Exactly. And that approach, while potentially controversial, actually allowed him to operate within the bounds of acceptable discourse. Remember, this was the Renaissance, a time of intellectual ferment and a growing openness to new ideas.
Right. There was already a sense that maybe Aristotle didn't have all the answers.
Yeah.
But I'm still curious about how Telesio reconciled his very scientific naturalistic view with the concept of an immortal soul, which he seemed to accept. Didn't that clash with his idea of the spiritus being a material part of our bodies?
It's a bit of a puzzle, to be honest. That the immortal soul doesn't play a major role in his philosophy. Some scholars believe he included it as a kind of strategic concession to the church, a way to avoid outright conflict.
So a bit of a political move to make sure his ideas could circulate without causing too much of an uproar.
That's a plausible interpretation. But even when he does talk about the immortal soul, he frames it in a way that's pretty distinct from traditional Christian doctrine.
So how did he explain it?
He saw it as something that's superimposed by God onto the natural soul, the spiritus. It's not some pre-existing ethereal entity, but something that's added on after the fact.
So for Telesio, the spiritus is the primary soul, the one that's actually doing the work of experiencing and understanding the world, and the immortal soul is kind of secondary, almost an afterthought.
That's a good way to put it, and I think it highlights the inherent tension in his work between his naturalistic worldview and the prevailing religious beliefs of his time. You know, he was clearly trying to carve out a space for scientific inquiry to elevate the importance of observation and reason, but he was still operating within a world where religious authority held immense power.
It's an incredibly delicate balancing act. And I think this conversation raises a really important point. Telesio's work wasn't just about scientific discoveries or philosophical theories.
Absolutely. It was about pushing the boundaries of what was considered acceptable thought, about challenging the status quo and paving the way for future generations to think more freely about the world.
And on that note, I think we've reached another turning point in our deep dive.
Indeed. We've covered a lot of ground, from Telesio's radical cosmology to his revolutionary ideas about the soul and how we experience the world.
But there's one crucial question we haven't tackled yet. What did all these revolutionary ideas mean for how we should live our lives?
Yes, the so what question. That's where we'll pick up next time as we explore how Telesio's unique worldview shaped his views on ethics and the good life.
Stay tuned, folks, because we're about to get even deeper into the heart of Telesio's philosophy and what it means for us today. Welcome back to the deep dive. I feel like, my brain has gotten a serious workout with all this talk about spiritus and heat and cold and revolutionary theories of knowledge.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to unpack, but that's the beauty of diving into the work of a thinker like Telesio.
Yeah.
He forces us to re-examine our assumptions about everything.
Totally. And today I'm really curious to explore what all of this means for the big question. How should we live? What did Telesio have to say about the good life?
Well, considering how much he emphasized self-preservation and the role of the physical world, you won't be surprised to hear that his ethics are deeply rooted in his naturalistic philosophy.
So no otherworldly ideals or abstract moral codes.
Not really. For Telesio, the good life is about thriving in this world, here and now. It's about understanding the natural world, learning to control our emotions, and figuring out how to live well in society.
So it's a very practical, almost pragmatic approach.
Exactly. And it makes perfect sense when you consider his understanding of the spiritus. Remember, it's constantly reacting to sensory input, trying to figure out what's beneficial or harmful for our survival.
Right. It's like we have this built-in mechanism for pursuing what's good for us, at least on a basic level.
Exactly. And Telesio believed that we can we can refine and hone that mechanism through knowledge and self-control. For him, virtues and vices weren't some abstract moral categories. They were behaviors that either promote or hinder our well-being.
So courage, for example, wouldn't be about some noble ideal, but about acting in a way that increases our chances of survival in a dangerous situation.
Precisely. And temperance wouldn't be about, denying ourselves pleasure. It's about moderating our desires so they don't lead us down a path that could harm us. It's all about understanding what truly serves our well-being in the long run.
I'm starting to see how his ethical framework really reflects that interconnectedness he emphasized between the physical and the mental.
Yeah.
Our moral choices aren't separate from our bodily experiences.
Yeah.
They're all part of this web of sensation and reaction and understanding.
You've got it. And this interconnectedness is key to understanding how Telesio envisioned self-improvement. He believed that gaining knowledge, especially about nature and medicine, was essential for living a good life.
Makes sense. The more we understand about how the world works, the better equipped we are to make choices that promote our well-being.
Right. But knowledge alone isn't enough. Telesio also stressed the importance of self-control, particularly over our emotions. He believed we have the power to choose how we react to things, to cultivate the discipline to act in accordance with reason, even when it's difficult.
So it's not just about knowing what's good for us, but actually having the willpower to follow through on that knowledge.
You said it. And this all ties into his ideas about living in society. For Telesio, our ethical framework should extend beyond our individual well-being to encompass the well-being of the community as a whole.
So a good life involves contributing to the flourishing of others, not just ourselves.
Precisely. And that means understanding social dynamics, learning to cooperate, resolving conflicts constructively, all those things that allow us to live together harmoniously.
It's amazing how Telesio managed to create such a comprehensive ethical system, one that's grounded in our physical nature, yet still, aspirational. He recognizes our basic need for self-preservation, but also urges us to strive for greater knowledge and self-mastery.
He was truly a visionary thinker. His ideas might sound a bit unusual at times, but I think they offer a valuable perspective on what it means to live a good life, one that's deeply connected to our bodies, our minds, and the world around us.
And that's what makes these deep dives so rewarding. We get to grapple with these unconventional ideas and see things from a completely different angle.
Couldn't agree more. Exploring Telesio's work, reminds us to question our assumptions, to look for connections between seemingly disparate things, and to never underestimate the power of observation and experience.
So, dear listener, we'll leave you with this. What does Telesio's radical philosophy make you think about? How do his ideas resonate with your own understanding of the good life?
Keep those questions simmering, because as Telesio himself might say, true understanding comes not from abstract pronouncements, but from careful observation, thoughtful reflection, and a willingness to challenge our own preconceived notions.
And until next time, keep diving deep.